From the devastating 2017 mudslides in Sierra Leone, which sent entire buildings out to sea in the blink of an eye, to an earthquake in China that caused 675 landslides in the span of only a few hours. Here are the 5 largest landslides in all history. Believe it or not, one of the deadliest modern landslides occurred on August 14th of 2017. It all started with 3 days of torrential rainfall hammering the capital city of Freetown in Sierra Leone. This constant water loosened the soil on surrounding mountains until it finally gave way. The city sits at the tip of a peninsula and was occupied by approximately 1 million people at the time of the disaster. Despite its size, the city was not well funded and its buildings were not ready for flooding or mudslides of this caliber. When the city was hit on that fateful day, hundreds of buildings were carried off of the peninsula and out into the sea. The total death count is expected to be 1,141 people, and nearly 3,000 people were left homeless in the wake of the event. In response to this disaster, the Red Cross contributed to immediate excavation and recovery efforts, and the United Nations sent a team of forensic officers and rescue dogs. Because of the quick response, the death toll of this disaster was likely much lower than it could have been. Landslides are a complex, dangerous natural phenomenon with many different causes ranging from flooding to volcanic eruption. In June of 2013, the North Indian state of Uttarakhand experienced what is known as a cloudburst. A cloudburst is an extreme amount of precipitation in a very short period of time, usually happening within thunderstorm conditions. Hail and rain make for perfect landslide conditions because the hail is able to soften the ground that the rain then carries away. The rainfall received during the month was far, far greater than what the state usually received in the same amount of time, and the architecture wasn't built for such massive flooding. Uttarakhand received almost 400% of the rain they would expect during their normal monsoon season, all within this short period of a couple of days in mid-June. In addition to all the extra floodwater this rain created, it also created the melting of the Chorabari Glacier, which led to heavy floods in cities downriver as well. Uttarakhand received the brunt of the landslide, clogging up its rivers with debris. Most of it was forested and uninhabited, which was very lucky for the Indian people. But many religious and historic pilgrimage sites were either damaged heavily or lost entirely in the flooding. The small cluster of cities within the state that were inhabited were deeply affected by the landslides. In total, it is expected that 6,054 people were killed by the landslides and the flooding on this tragic day, and the effects are still noticeable within Uttarakhand. Now, while some landslides take days or weeks to come to fruition, as is generally true with flood-induced mudslides, that was not the case for the Nevado Huascaran debris fall. It all happened on a single day. May 31st, 1970. A debris avalanche and mud flow were triggered by the Ancash Earthquake, a massive quake just off the coast of Peru. The Ancash Earthquake, also known as the Great Peruvian Earthquake, was one of the largest that the country of Peru had ever dealt with. It occurred around 3:20 p.m. local time and registered at a 7.9 on the Richter scale. The effects of the earthquake could be felt for over 400 miles. And the most damage caused directly by the earthquake happened within the small coastal towns near the epicenter and in the Santa River Valley. This earthquake caused the snow-covered peak of Peru's tallest mountain, Mount Huascaran, to break away and begin a massive avalanche. This did not stop at the mountain's base, however. It carried forward into the dirt and mud, turning into a landslide and careening across the country while taking entire towns with it. The nearby provincial capital of Yungay was often thought to be safe due to its distance from the mountain, but the size of the mudslide was unprecedented. It tore the town apart, which was especially deadly because the event happened on a Sunday. On Sundays, the people of the nearby towns traveled to Yungay to do their shopping in the market. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives in this disaster, with the final death toll proposed to be somewhere around 30,000 from the landslide alone and 70,000 total. Peru still has not allowed the resettlement of Yungay, though many of the survivors took up refuge in a camp to the north, which has evolved into today's town by the same name. On November 13th of 1985, and after 69 years of dormancy, the Nevado del Ruiz stratovolcano in Tolima, Colombia, erupted. The eruption caught nearby towns off guard, even though local volcanological organizations had been warning the government to evacuate the area for months. Unfortunately, nobody listened. The eruption of the volcano resulted in pyroclastic flows that melted the glaciers that had formed on the mountain throughout the years. This created not one, but 4 separate mudslides, all of which moved down the slopes of the volcano at nearly 50 kilometers per hour. The nearby town of Armero is the one that was struck most fiercely. Other towns were affected, but none were leveled like Armero. This eruption and the landslides that followed it were actually the catalyst for reform in the way that volcanoes were studied and measured in Colombia. Before this, nobody really knew how deadly they could be within the country, and it's rumored that many in Armero actually went outside to watch the gorgeous eruption as it was happening. Any efforts to make it to Armero after the eruption were halted severely by the composition of the volcanic mud. The ash-mud mixture made it nearly impossible to move through without getting struck, and therefore it was nearly 12 hours after the landslide hit Armero before the rescue teams were able to arrive. Of the 29,000 residents of the small mountainside town, 20,000 are believed to have perished in the landslide. 3,000 people in neighboring towns also died, bringing the total death toll to around 23,000 people. The fact that the event was a foreseeable catastrophe makes it all the more unfortunate, as if people had listened to the scientists when they were told to evacuate, they might have had a chance. The coastal state of Vargas in Venezuela has always had flooding issues. That's simply part of being a coastal state, and generally their architecture was well equipped to handle such flooding. In December of 1999, however, their buildings were put to the test when torrential rains caused flash floods and debris flows with the power to destroy entire cities. During the 2 days of flooding, entire towns, including Cerro Grande and Carmen de Uria, completely disappeared, wiped off the map as the buildings were pushed entirely into the ocean by mudslides. Between December 14th and December 16th, the state received roughly equivalent to an entire year's rainfall all at once. Because the state was located effectively within a basin that led out to the ocean, the high walls that usually protected the people became their assailants, and the land broke away to carry much of the architecture out into the sea. The event is also expected to have killed off nearly 10% of the state's population, between 10,000 and 30,000 people. Because there was no census data from the region during that time, there really is no way to know how many people died. What is known is the amount of damage that was caused. Roughly $3.5 billion in damages were accrued by the incredibly poor country of Venezuela, and therefore, much of the damage from the disaster is still evident today. Only around 1,000 bodies were found. The rest are presumed to be lost at sea. On the evening of December 16, 1920, a massive earthquake struck China's remote Gansu province. This earthquake, despite being the second deadliest quake in the entirety of the 20th century, would receive very little coverage because of the overshadowing political and humanitarian crises occurring due to the civil war in China. Even so, the quake and the landslides that it caused were incredibly deadly, especially because the areas hit were so densely populated. Estimates of the earthquake's power range between 7.8 and 8.5 on the Richter scale, and it resulted in an astounding 675 major landslides in the region. Most of these, of course, either didn't hit anything too important or occurred in areas without people. but a couple of them came down full force on local Chinese towns, which were in no way prepared for such an event. The cities of Longda and Huining were wiped off the map. Buildings, people, structures, everything was cleared away in an instant. Other local towns such as Lanzhou, Taiyuan, Xi'an, Xining, and Yinchuan were damaged severely, but managed to stay standing. Overall, the destruction was seen in 7 provinces and regions, and the quake was felt from the Yellow Sea to Qinghai Province. Because of the turmoil occurring within the country at the time, a total death count is unrealistic to find. But professional estimates place it between 230,000 and 310,000, making it one of the deadliest disasters that China and the world have ever seen. Landslides are difficult to predict, deadly in nature, and almost impossible to stop at a large scale. The death and destruction that they are capable of is almost unparalleled. And because of this, it is imperative to listen to scientists when they come out with early warnings for evacuation and safety. While these events were tragedies, it is important to understand how much humanity as a whole has learned from them and what steps can be taken in the future to prevent such tragedies. To see another video just like this one, be sure to click the link on screen now. With that, thank you all for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.